Every night at exactly 9 o'clock, the old orange cat escaped from Street Ann's care home. The nurses thought it was a harmless habit. The residents thought it was amusing. But Father Michael Donovan noticed something strange. The cat never wandered randomly. Every evening, it slipped through the same side door, crossed the same quiet street, and waited outside the small parish church until someone followed. Then it would lead them back to the nursing home and stop outside the room of a woman nobody ever visited. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore. She was 83 years old and had not received a single family visitor in nearly 3 years. Most people believed she had simply been forgotten, but the old cat seemed determined to prove otherwise. Night after night, it kept returning for the priest as if trying to deliver a message. Eventually, Father Michael followed. What he discovered would uncover a painful family secret, a hidden act of sacrifice, and a truth that would change the final chapter of Eleanor's life forever. A cool autumn wind drifted through the streets of Richmond, Virginia, carrying fallen leaves across sidewalks while the lights of Street Ann's care home glowed softly against the darkness. Father Michael Donovan locked the front doors of St. Matthew's Parish shortly after evening prayer and prepared to walk home when he saw the cat again. The animal sat patiently beneath a street lamp across the road. It was an elderly orange tabby with faded fur, a torn left ear, and bright green eyes that seemed unusually intelligent. The parish priest had noticed the cat several times during the past month. Every evening, almost like clockwork, it appeared outside the church shortly after 9 o'clock. Then it simply sat there waiting. At first, Father Michael assumed it belonged to a nearby family. Later, he learned the truth. The cat belonged to Street Ann's care home and somehow escaped the facility nearly every night. The staff called him Oliver. Nobody understood how he kept getting out. "You're late tonight," Father Michael said with a smile. Oliver immediately stood and walked toward him. The priest chuckled softly. At 65 years old, Father Michael had served the community for more than 3 decades. He was a tall man with silver hair, kind blue eyes, and a gentle voice that made people feel comfortable almost immediately. Years of listening to confessions and comforting grieving families had taught him patience. Yet even he found the cat's behavior unusual. Oliver walked several feet away before stopping and looking back, waiting. Father Michael raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" The cat meowed once and continued toward the nursing home. Then he stopped again, waiting. It felt remarkably deliberate. Curious, the priest followed. Together they crossed the quiet street and entered the grounds of Street Ann's through an unlocked side gate. Oliver moved confidently along a familiar path. This clearly wasn't his first trip. The cat eventually reached a row of windows overlooking the east wing of the facility. There, he stopped beneath one particular window and sat down. Father Michael looked up. A single lamp glowed behind the curtains. "Is someone in there?" he asked quietly. Oliver meowed. The answer, strangely enough, felt like yes. The next morning, Father Michael visited the nursing home. Street Ann's had served elderly residents for decades and maintained a strong relationship with the parish. Many residents attended church services when their health allowed. Others appreciated occasional visits from clergy. The director, a friendly woman named Susan Bennett, greeted him warmly. During their conversation, Father Michael casually mentioned the cat. Susan immediately laughed. "Oliver again? Again? That cat is becoming a legend." She shook her head. "Every night he disappears. Every morning he returns." Father Michael smiled. "Any idea where he goes?" Susan hesitated. "Actually, yes." Her expression became thoughtful. "We finally figured it out last week." "And?" "He spends most of his time outside Eleanor Whitmore's room." The name meant nothing to Father Michael, Susan noticed. "Room 214. She lowered her voice slightly. 83 years old. Been here almost 4 years. Something in her tone suggested more. "Family?" the priest asked. Susan sighed. "Not really." The answer surprised him. Most residents received at least occasional visits. Children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, someone. "No family at all?" Susan shook her head. 3 adult children. Father Michael frowned. 3? None have visited in nearly 3 years. Silence settled briefly between them. Sadly, such stories were not uncommon. Yet they always felt heartbreaking. "What happened?" Susan leaned against the reception desk. "Depends who you ask." The response immediately caught his attention. Before she could explain further, a nurse approached needing assistance. The conversation ended there, but curiosity remained. Later that afternoon, Father Michael decided to introduce himself to Eleanor Whitmore. Room 214 sat near the end of a quiet hallway overlooking a small courtyard garden. The door stood slightly open. He knocked gently. "Come in," a voice answered. The room felt modest but neat. Books lined a shelf beside the window. Several framed photographs sat atop a dresser. An elderly woman rested in a chair reading a novel. Eleanor Whitmore appeared smaller than Father Michael expected. At 83, age had thinned her frame and softened her features, but her eyes remained sharp and alert. Silver hair framed a face marked by both kindness and sadness. She looked up from her book. "Father Donovan." The priest smiled. "You know who I am." Eleanor closed the novel. "Small place." Her voice carried a trace of humor. "People talk." They spent nearly an hour discussing ordinary things. Books, weather, gardening, local history. Eleanor proved intelligent, articulate, and surprisingly funny. Yet throughout the conversation, Father Michael noticed something missing. Family photographs displayed prominently around the room showed children at various ages. School graduations, weddings, birthdays. Yet none appeared recent. Finally, he asked carefully, "Do your children live nearby?" The question changed everything. The smile vanished from Eleanor's face. Not dramatically, just enough. "Not anymore," she replied. Silence followed. Father Michael immediately regretted asking. Yet before he could change the subject, Eleanor surprised him. "They think I abandoned them." The words landed heavily. The priest remained quiet. Years of ministry taught him when people needed space to continue. Eleanor looked toward the window. "Funny thing is," she whispered, "I spent my entire life trying to protect them." The sadness in her voice felt deeper than loneliness. It sounded like regret. Before Father Michael could respond, movement appeared outside the window. Oliver sat on the ledge watching them. The old cat stared directly at the priest, then at Eleanor, then back at the priest. For the first time, Father Michael felt certain of something impossible. The cat had not been leading him here by accident. Somehow, for reasons he did not yet understand, Oliver wanted someone to hear Eleanor's story. And judging by the pain hidden behind her eyes, it was a story nobody had listened to in a very long time. A gentle rain fell over Richmond the next evening, tapping softly against the windows of Street Ann's care home, while warm yellow lights glowed throughout the quiet hallways. Father Michael Donovan found himself thinking about Eleanor Whitmore long after his visit had ended the day before. There had been something haunting about the way she spoke of her children. Not anger, not bitterness, sadness. The kind of sadness carried by someone who had spent years being misunderstood. During his decades as a priest, Father Michael had learned that broken families rarely collapsed because of a single moment. More often, the truth became buried beneath assumptions, pride, and silence. Yet the question remained. Why had 3 adult children completely abandoned a mother who seemed intelligent, kind, and thoughtful? And why did an old cat appear so determined to make sure someone paid attention to her? Shortly after evening prayer, Father Michael crossed the street towards Street Ann's once again. As if on schedule, Oliver was already waiting beside the church gate. The elderly orange tabby meowed softly and began walking toward the nursing home. This time, the priest smiled. "All right, Oliver, I'm coming." The cat seemed satisfied with the answer. When Father Michael reached room 214, he found Eleanor sitting beside the window knitting a small blanket. Oliver had somehow arrived before him and now rested comfortably in her lap. The sight immediately softened the atmosphere. Eleanor looked up and smiled. "Your assistant brought you back." Father Michael laughed quietly. "I believe he did." Oliver responded with a contented purr. The priest pulled a chair closer. For several minutes, they discussed ordinary things again. Yet eventually the conversation drifted toward the previous day's unfinished topic. Eleanor noticed his hesitation almost immediately. "You want to ask about my children," she said. Father Michael looked slightly embarrassed. "Only if you want to talk about them." Eleanor gazed out the rain-covered window. Maybe it's time someone heard the whole story. The room grew quiet except for the soft sound of rainfall. Oliver remained curled in her lap, completely still. Eleanor took a slow breath. "I wasn't always here." Father Michael nodded. "I imagine not." A faint smile appeared. 40 years ago, I owned the largest bookstore in Richmond." That surprised him. Eleanor explained that she and her husband, Robert Whitmore, built a successful family business together. The bookstore became a beloved part of the community. They raised 3 children, Daniel, Rebecca, and Thomas, in a comfortable home filled with books, music, and opportunity. For many years, life seemed almost ideal. Then Robert became ill. The diagnosis arrived suddenly. Aggressive cancer. Within 18 months, he was gone. Eleanor looked down at her hands. Even after all those years, the memory remained painful. The children were young adults by then, she said softly, still finding their way. Father Michael listened carefully. He already sensed where the story might be heading. After Robert's death, the bookstore began struggling financially. Online retailers, rising costs, and declining sales created problems that worsened every year. Eleanor fought to keep the business alive because it represented everything she and her husband built together. Yet eventually, reality became impossible to ignore. Debt accumulated. Loans came due. Creditors demanded payment. I had a choice, Eleanor said. Lose everything or sell. The decision seemed straightforward, but it wasn't. Eleanor revealed that hidden among the financial problems was another crisis. Daniel, her oldest son, had accumulated significant debt from a failed business venture. Rebecca faced medical bills after complications from a difficult pregnancy. Thomas struggled financially after losing his job. None of them knew how serious Eleanor's situation had become because she intentionally hid it. I didn't want them worrying, she admitted. Father Michael sighed softly. He had heard similar stories before. Parents often carried burdens alone long after they should have asked for help. What happened? Eleanor stared toward the photographs on her dresser. I sold everything. The bookstore, the family home, investments, savings, assets accumulated over decades. She liquidated nearly everything she owned. Yet, instead of keeping the money for herself, she quietly used most of it to eliminate her children's debts and solve their financial crises. Daniel's creditors were paid. Rebecca's medical expenses disappeared. Thomas received enough support to start over. They thought the money came from selling the business, Eleanor explained, which was true. Father Michael frowned slightly. Then why are they angry? Tears appeared in Eleanor's eyes for the first time. Because I never told them the rest. The priest remained silent. Eleanor continued. After exhausting her resources helping her children, very little remained. Within several years, declining health forced her into assisted living. Her children learned only fragments of the truth. From their perspective, Eleanor sold the family bookstore without consulting them, refused to discuss finances, and eventually moved into a nursing facility. Rumors and assumptions filled the gaps. Daniel believed she squandered money. Rebecca thought Eleanor cared more about the bookstore than the family. Thomas blamed her for selling a business that carried generations of memories. I tried explaining, Eleanor whispered. But by then, everyone was already angry. Communication deteriorated. Arguments followed. Then silence. Months became years. Calls stopped. Visits stopped. Eventually, contact disappeared altogether. Father Michael sat quietly absorbing the story. The tragedy was painfully clear. Eleanor spent years sacrificing everything for her children. Yet because she hid the sacrifice itself, they never understood what she had done. The very act intended to protect them became the reason they resented her. Oliver suddenly lifted his head and gently pressed against Eleanor's arm. She smiled sadly while stroking the cat's fur. He's been my only visitor for a long time. Father Michael looked at the old tabby. How did you two become friends? Eleanor laughed softly. 3 years ago, he wandered into my room during a thunderstorm. She scratched behind Oliver's ears. Neither of us has left since. The cat purred loudly. For a moment, the sadness eased. Then Eleanor reached toward the bedside table and removed a small envelope. There's something else, she said quietly. Father Michael accepted it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, some addressed to Daniel, others to Rebecca and Thomas. None had been opened. I wrote every month, Eleanor whispered. Birthdays, Christmas, grandchildren's graduations. Her voice trembled. I never stopped. Father Michael looked at the stack. Years of love sat trapped inside sealed envelopes nobody ever read. The sight broke his heart. Then he noticed something else. Several letters had no stamps. They had never been mailed. Why? He asked gently. Eleanor lowered her eyes. After a while, I stopped believing they wanted to hear from me. Silence filled the room. Outside, rain continued falling. Inside, Oliver rested his head against Eleanor's hand. And for the first time, Father Michael began to understand why the old cat kept escaping every night. Eleanor did not need company. She needed a witness. Someone who knew the truth. Someone who might help reunite a family before it became too late. A cool morning mist hung over Richmond the next day, softening the outlines of buildings and trees while sunlight struggled through layers of gray cloud, and Father Michael Donovan sat alone in his church office staring at the stack of letters Eleanor Whitmore had entrusted to him. The envelopes rested neatly on his desk, exactly as she had handed them over the previous evening. Some looked years old. Others appeared relatively recent. Together they represented birthdays missed, holidays spent alone, milestones never celebrated, and words that had remained trapped in silence for far too long. During his years as a priest, Father Michael had witnessed many forms of heartbreak. Yet, there was something uniquely painful about seeing love rejected, not because it was absent, but because it had been misunderstood. He picked up one envelope addressed to Rebecca Whitmore Harper. The handwriting was elegant, despite Eleanor's age. Across the front, she had written only 2 words. For Rebecca, nothing more. No bitterness, no accusation, no attempt to defend herself. Just a mother's love waiting to be received. Father Michael understood immediately why Oliver kept leading him back to room 214. The cat had somehow recognized what everyone else overlooked. Eleanor was not simply lonely. She was carrying a story that had never been heard. By midday, the priest returned to St. Anne's. As expected, Oliver greeted him near the entrance before escorting him toward Eleanor's room, as though performing his usual duty. When Father Michael entered, he found Eleanor watching birds gather in the courtyard garden outside her window. "You came back," she said softly. "I did." The old woman smiled faintly. Oliver probably made sure of that. The cat jumped onto the bed and settled between them. Father Michael sat down and placed the letters on the bedside table. "I couldn't stop thinking about these." Eleanor looked at them quietly. Neither could I. Several moments passed before the priest spoke again. "Have you ever told your children the full truth?" Eleanor's expression became distant. "Not completely." "Why?" The question lingered. Eventually she sighed. "Because I was ashamed." That answer surprised him. "Ashamed?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "After Robert died, I promised myself I would keep everything together." She glanced toward an old wedding photograph sitting on the dresser. The bookstore, the house, the family. Her eyes filled with sadness. "Instead, I lost all 3. Father Michael understood the feeling. Many people measured themselves by outcomes rather than intentions. Eleanor had spent years blaming herself for circumstances far beyond her control. "You sacrificed everything for your children," he said gently. "That's not failure." A tear slipped down her cheek. "They don't know that." The words hung heavily between them. Then Father Michael made a decision. Maybe they should. Eleanor immediately looked away. "No. Why not?" "Because it's too late." The answer came quickly, almost automatically, like something she had repeated to herself for years. "Eleanor," Father Michael said softly, "it's only too late when nobody is willing to listen." She smiled sadly. "And who would listen now?" Before he could answer, a nurse entered with medication and interrupted the conversation. Father Michael remained thoughtful as he left later that afternoon. The question stayed with him. Who would listen now? The answer arrived sooner than expected. 2 days later, while helping organize records in the parish office, Father Michael received a phone call from Susan Bennett at St. Anne's. "You should come over," she said. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," she paused. "But Oliver has done something unusual." That statement immediately caught his attention. Within 20 minutes, he arrived at the nursing home. Susan met him in the lobby, struggling not to smile. "You're not going to believe this." She led him outside toward the facility parking lot. There, sitting calmly beside a silver sedan, was Oliver. The cat appeared remarkably pleased with himself. Standing nearby was a woman in her early 50s staring at him with complete confusion. "This cat followed me from the grocery store," she explained the moment Father Michael approached. "All the way here." The priest froze. Something about her face felt familiar. Then he realized why. He had seen it in the photographs inside Eleanor's room. The same eyes, the same smile. Older now, but unmistakable. "Rebecca?" he asked carefully. The woman blinked. "How do you know my name?" Father Michael looked down at Oliver. The cat sat proudly beside the car. Susan stared between them. Wait. The realization struck all three at once. Rebecca Whitmore Harper followed the cat to Street Ann's completely by accident. Or perhaps not by accident at all. According to Rebecca, Oliver appeared outside the grocery store parking lot that morning and refused to leave. Every time she attempted to drive away, the cat ran ahead of her vehicle. Concerned for the animal's safety, she eventually stopped and tried to approach him. Oliver immediately began walking. Somehow, over the next 20 minutes, she ended up following him across town until he led her directly to the nursing home entrance. I know this sounds crazy, Rebecca admitted, but it honestly felt like he wanted me to come here. Father Michael glanced toward the old tabby. At this point, almost nothing would have surprised him. Rebecca's expression shifted when she noticed the facility sign. My mother lives here. Silence followed. You know Eleanor? She asked. The priest nodded slowly. I've spent some time with her recently. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Guilt immediately appeared on her face. Not anger, not resentment, guilt. I haven't visited in a while. Father Michael chose his words carefully. 3 years. Rebecca looked stunned. She told you? No. He smiled gently. The staff did. Tears formed almost instantly. The reaction surprised even Rebecca herself. I kept meaning to come. The explanation sounded painfully sincere. Life got busy. Then her voice cracked. And after enough time passed, I didn't know how. Father Michael had heard that confession many times. 1 missed visit became 2. Then 6 months. Then years. Shame often grew stronger than intention. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, Rebecca looked toward the building entrance. How is she? The question carried genuine concern. Father Michael smiled softly. She misses you. Rebecca wiped her eyes. She's probably still angry. Actually, he replied, I don't think she is. Upstairs in room 214, Eleanor sat reading beside the window, while unaware that her daughter stood only a few floors below. And outside, Oliver stretched comfortably beneath a tree. The old cat closed his eyes and began purring. For the first time in years, the distance between a mother and her child had started to shrink. Somehow, impossibly, the cat had found the first missing piece of a broken family, and Father Michael suddenly suspected Oliver wasn't finished yet. A warm afternoon sun broke through the clouds above Richmond, filling the courtyard of Street Ann's care home with soft golden light, while Father Michael Donovan stood quietly near the hallway outside room 214. Inside the room, 2 women sat facing one another after nearly 3 years without a real conversation. Eleanor Whitmore held her hands tightly in her lap, while Rebecca Harper sat across from her struggling to find the right words. Neither had expected this moment. Eleanor certainly had not expected to see her daughter walk through the doorway that afternoon. For several seconds after Rebecca entered, both simply stared at one another in stunned silence. Then Eleanor began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears slipping down her cheeks as years of loneliness suddenly collided with hope. Rebecca crossed the room almost immediately and wrapped her arms around her mother. Neither spoke for a long time. They simply held on. Father Michael had quietly stepped outside to give them privacy. But even from the hallway, he understood how important the moment was. Some wounds took years to form. Healing them would not happen in a single afternoon, yet healing had begun. Oliver sat outside the room near the doorway as though standing guard. Several nurses passing through the hallway smiled at the sight. The old orange cat appeared completely satisfied with himself. Nearly an hour later, Father Michael was invited back inside. The atmosphere had changed. Not completely. Pain still lingered beneath the surface. But for the first time, there was openness. Rebecca sat beside her mother instead of across from her. Eleanor looked exhausted but lighter somehow. Father, Rebecca said quietly, my mother told me what really happened. The priest nodded. Eleanor lowered her eyes. Not all of it. Rebecca immediately turned toward her. Mom? Her voice cracked slightly. Why didn't you tell us? The question filled the room. Eleanor looked toward the photographs on the dresser. Because I never wanted you to feel guilty. Rebecca stared at her in disbelief. You sold everything. Tears returned to her eyes. The bookstore, the house, your retirement. Eleanor smiled sadly. You needed help. We could have figured it out together. Maybe. Eleanor paused. But you were my children. The simple answer somehow made everything more heartbreaking. Rebecca shook her head. All these years I thought you chose the bookstore over us. Eleanor looked surprised. What? Rebecca wiped her eyes. After Dad died, you spent every day trying to save the business. Her voice trembled. I thought it mattered more than we did. Silence settled over the room. Then, understanding slowly appeared on Eleanor's face. For the first time, she realized how differently her children had interpreted those years. Rebecca, she whispered, the bookstore was the only thing keeping us afloat. More tears followed, not because either woman was angry, because they were finally beginning to understand one another. Years of assumptions were being replaced by truth. Later that evening, Rebecca remained at Street Ann's for dinner. She listened to stories she had not heard in decades, childhood memories, stories about her father, family moments long buried beneath resentment and distance. Before leaving, she made a promise. I'll come back tomorrow. Eleanor smiled. I'd like that. After Rebecca left, Father Michael stayed behind briefly. Eleanor appeared thoughtful. Do you think she'll really come back? The question revealed how much hope had been damaged over the years. Yes, he said gently. I do. Oliver jumped onto Eleanor's lap and began purring loudly. The old woman laughed for the first time in days. He seems confident. He usually is. Over the next week, something remarkable happened. Rebecca returned every day. Then she brought photographs, then family albums, then stories. Slowly, pieces of the broken relationship began reconnecting. Yet one challenge remained: Daniel and Thomas. Eleanor's two sons still had no idea what was happening. Neither knew Rebecca had visited. Neither knew the truth surrounding their mother's sacrifices. Father Michael suspected Oliver understood this before anyone else. One evening, the cat disappeared again. By now, nobody found that unusual. Yet instead of stopping at St. Matthew's Parish as he normally did, Oliver wandered several blocks farther into town. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at Street Ann's carrying unexpected news. You're not going to believe this, she told Father Michael. Try me. Rebecca laughed softly. My brother called last night. Daniel? She nodded. He asked the strangest question. Father Michael already suspected the answer. What was it? He wanted to know if I'd seen an orange cat. The priest couldn't help smiling. According to Daniel, an elderly orange tabby had appeared outside his office building and refused to leave. Several employees attempted to coax the animal away, but Oliver simply sat near the entrance staring through the glass doors. Hours later, Daniel eventually approached him. The cat immediately walked toward his car. And? Father Michael asked. Rebecca shook her head in disbelief. Daniel followed him. Neither could explain why. Yet somehow the old cat led him halfway across Richmond before disappearing. The experience left Daniel curious enough to call his sister. The timing felt impossible to ignore. He's coming tomorrow, Rebecca said quietly. Father Michael looked toward room 214 where Eleanor sat reading beside the window. His heart lifted. Another piece of the family was finding its way back. That afternoon, he shared the news with Eleanor. The elderly woman covered her mouth with trembling hands. Daniel? That's the plan. Tears filled her eyes once more. I don't know what I'll say. Father Michael smiled gently. Maybe start with hello. Eleanor laughed through her tears. It was a beautiful sound. Later that night, as the sun disappeared beyond the city skyline, Oliver rested on the windowsill beside Eleanor's bed. The old cat looked out over Richmond while traffic lights glowed below. He appeared peaceful, patient, as though he understood that some journeys took longer than others. One daughter had returned, one son was on his way, and somewhere out there, a third child remained. The family was not whole yet, but for the first time in years, it was no longer falling apart. It was finding its way home, and somehow, impossibly, an old cat was leading the way. A bright spring morning settled over Richmond, Virginia, filling the city with warm sunlight while flowering dogwood trees bloomed across the grounds of Street Ann's care home. Nearly 6 weeks had passed since Oliver first led Father Michael Donovan to Eleanor Whitmore's room, and during that time something extraordinary had happened. A family that had spent years divided by misunderstanding was slowly finding its way back together. It had not happened overnight. There were difficult conversations, tears, apologies, and painful truths that needed to be spoken aloud. But little by little, walls built over decades began to crumble. Daniel Whitmore arrived the day after Rebecca's visit, just as promised. The reunion with his mother had been awkward at first. Neither knew where to begin. Years of silence created a distance that felt impossible to cross. Yet once Eleanor finally explained what happened to the bookstore, the family home, and the money she secretly used to rescue her children during their darkest moments, everything changed. Daniel sat speechless for nearly 10 minutes after hearing the truth. The successful businessman who once believed his mother had abandoned the family legacy suddenly realized she had sacrificed everything she owned for him. "You paid my debts," he whispered. Eleanor nodded. "You were my son." Daniel lowered his head and cried. It was the first time he had cried in front of his mother since childhood. A week later, Thomas arrived from North Carolina after Rebecca convinced him to visit. Unlike Daniel, Thomas had carried anger for years. He believed Eleanor sold the bookstore because she no longer cared about preserving their father's memory. Yet when he finally heard the full story, the anger dissolved into heartbreak. He learned that his mother had spent years protecting him from financial ruin while quietly giving away pieces of her own future. By the end of that visit, Thomas sat beside Eleanor, holding her hand while looking through old family photographs. "I should have come sooner," he said. Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. "You're here now." For the first time in nearly 3 years, all 3 children sat together in their mother's room. Nurses passing through the hallway often paused to smile at the sight. Room 214 had transformed from one of the quietest rooms in the building into one of the happiest. Laughter frequently drifted into the corridor. Family photographs multiplied across shelves and walls. Grandchildren visited on weekends. Birthdays were celebrated again. Life returned. Through it all, Oliver remained a constant presence. The old orange tabby spent most days moving between Eleanor's chair, the windowsill, and Father Michael's lap whenever the priest stopped by. Staff members often joked that Oliver was now the unofficial director of family reunification. Even Eleanor laughed whenever someone mentioned it. "He's done more counseling than the rest of us combined," she once said. Yet beneath the humor, everyone knew there was truth in the statement. Without the cat, none of it would have happened. One afternoon in early May, Father Michael visited Eleanor to find her looking unusually thoughtful. She sat beside the window watching Oliver sleep in a patch of sunlight. "You seem far away," he observed. Eleanor smiled softly. "I'm thinking about how strange life is." The priest pulled up a chair. "How so?" She looked toward the family photographs now filling nearly every available surface in the room. "For years I thought my story was ending." Her eyes glistened slightly. "Then God sent me a cat." Father Michael laughed. "He does work in mysterious ways." Eleanor nodded. "I spent so much time believing I had been forgotten." She glanced down at Oliver. "Turns out I was wrong." The following weeks became some of the happiest Eleanor had experienced in years. Her health remained fragile, but her spirit grew stronger. She attended family lunches, met great-grandchildren she barely knew, shared stories nobody had heard before. Most importantly, she no longer sat alone waiting for visitors who never came. They came often now, sometimes too often, according to the nurses. One Saturday afternoon, the entire Whitmore family gathered in the courtyard garden behind St. Anne's. Children played among flower beds while adults sat together beneath large shade trees. Eleanor watched everything from her wheelchair, surrounded by people she once feared she would never see again. Daniel stood beside her. Rebecca arranged photographs. Thomas grilled hamburgers while arguing playfully with his siblings. It felt wonderfully ordinary. Father Michael arrived shortly after lunch carrying iced tea. He stopped when he saw the scene before him. "Looks like a full house." Eleanor smiled. "Best kind." The priest noticed Oliver resting beneath Eleanor's chair. The old cat appeared slower than before. His movements lacked the energy he once carried. Age was finally catching up to him. Eleanor noticed too. She gently reached down and stroked his fur. "He's tired." Father Michael nodded quietly. Later that evening, after the family departed, Oliver climbed into Eleanor's lap and fell asleep. He remained there throughout the night. The next morning, nurses found him peacefully curled against her blanket. He had passed away in his sleep. The news spread quickly through the building. Staff members cried. Residents shared stories. Even Father Michael struggled to hide his emotions. Yet nobody felt only sadness. There was gratitude too. Oliver's work was finished. A few days later, the Whitmore family planted a small tree in the courtyard garden overlooking Eleanor's window. Beneath it, they placed a simple plaque. "In loving memory of Oliver, the cat who brought our family home." Eleanor visited the tree every afternoon, sometimes with family, sometimes alone. One evening, as the sun set over Richmond and painted the sky with gold and orange light, she sat beside Father Michael, watching the leaves move gently in the breeze. "Do you think he knew what he was doing?" she asked. The priest smiled. "I think God knew what he was doing." Eleanor laughed softly. Then she looked toward the courtyard where her grandchildren played together. For years, she believed her family was lost forever. Instead, she discovered that love had simply been waiting for the truth. And somehow, through the determination of an old orange cat, that truth finally found its way home. As the evening light faded and laughter echoed across the garden, Eleanor felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not because her life had been perfect, not because the past could be changed, but because forgiveness had made room for a future, and because one faithful little cat refused to let a lonely woman be forgotten.